Hello, my name is Alex, also known as Grand Bell on various chess websites, and I have decided to start recapping some tournament games that I'm playing. However, before I get into the first tournament recap, as you'll see here, I want to give a little bit of a background on myself and why I'm doing this. Hi, like I said, my name is Alex. I am a 19-year-old college student, sophomore at the University of Alabama, studying mathematics, and I have been playing chess on and off for actually the last 15 years. I started learning it when I was about 4 or 5 years old. When I was a kid, I went to a handful of rated tournaments over the board. I played online sometimes. I just kind of had it as a hobby for a long time. However, over the last couple of years, ever since the big boom in 2020, I started taking it a little bit more seriously, and I started improving a lot over those last couple of years. And this last week, I got really, really back into it, and I started studying a little bit more heavily, and I decided to start entering into tournaments again. Now, in Alabama, there aren't a whole lot of options for over the board tournaments, over the board classical tournaments, which is the way to improve the rating that matters the most in the USCF, the US Chess Federation, which is your regular rating over the board. However, USCF rated tournaments in general can still be incredibly valuable to gain experience in. I had been playing them on and off for the last few years, but I decided to start doing it seriously again and actually record each game and my analysis of them afterwards. This has two different, very useful applications and uses. The first is the fact that it kind of keeps me accountable. If there is something separate from just the games that's getting me to play the games, then it gets me it kind of starts to build a habit, which can be very useful just for me personally and to help me improve as a player. And it also makes me analyze my games more thoroughly, which is something that a lot of people at my chess rating level, which I'll talk about in a little bit, um, I think oftentimes struggle with getting in the habit of doing. Analyzing your games is much more important than playing more games. If you play a million, blitz games and you just start, to just spam the play now button, play again, play again, play again, you're not gaining anything from it. You have to analyze your games and learn from your mistakes and not repeat those mistakes if you want to improve. So I think that'll help me a lot as a player. The other thing is, I actually think that it's a little bit of a unique perspective on chess as a whole. You see tons of content analyzing the highest level of chess, the classical games between grandmasters, and the deep nuances and intricacies of those positions analyzed by other extremely high rated players. However, uh, I don't think there are many people that make videos on lower rated chess or heavily analyze games of lower rated chess. And I think it can be very useful for a lot of people to see somebody playing and trying to improve who is closer to their skill level. I would consider myself to be a higher level intermediate chess player. I'm about 1700 rapid and a blitz on chess.com. So I'm not quite at the advanced level. However, there is a good chance that I may be higher rated than some people watching this. However, the gap between those two things is probably a lot smaller than the gap when you watch a video by like Hikaru Nakamura, for example. That's obviously one of the more extreme ones, but you get the point. Um, Lower level chess, in watching people that are intermediate players that are trying to improve as players, just isn't very common. And I think a lot of people can actually learn from it who are closer to that skill level. So that's kind of my target audience with these videos, analyzing my games from the viewpoint of somebody who is intermediate level, to help explain things, in a way that other people who are near that skill level can help learn from. So that's kind of the intention of this. So we're going to start with this tournament. This is the Marshall Chess Club Sunday Online Beginner Tournament. They hold these tournaments weekly. You can sign up for them if you get a USCF membership. They're just online tournaments. They take place on chess.com. And I think they're extremely useful if you want to dip your toe into this kind of a thing and start having more serious tournament games, even if they are just online. I think it can be very useful for a lot of people. Uh, with that being said, this is the sort of tournament that when I signed up for it a few days ago, I expected to do very well in it. The tournament is complete. It all took place on Sunday morning, which is earlier today. I'll be recording this probably tonight before I go to bed on Sunday night. The tournament takes place all on one day, and I went into it expecting to do very well. Why is that? Well, a couple of reasons. First is that I'd actually played in this tournament once or twice in the past, over the last couple of years. One of the various tournaments that I had been entering in. And when I played in this tournament, I usually did pretty well. It's one of the few times I'd actually won a prize in tournaments where I finished, I think, tied for second one time. However, the other reason is the rating. So I went into this as the second highest USCF rated player in the tournament. And I went in as the highest chess.com rated player in the tournament. Like I said, my peak rating is 1700, but my current rating is about 1600. And I believe everybody else in the tournament was at least 150 rating points below me as of current chess.com rapid ratings. So I was going in with very high expectations for myself, and we'll have to see how that turns out for me. So we're starting with round one, and I'm playing a man named Jude, and he is only 700 rated USCF. However, he is one of the many examples of players that have very different strengths, levels of strength, compared to what their USCF rating might show. The prevalence of online chess makes this an extremely common occurrence, especially in these lower level tournaments. If you start going to, opens and higher level tournaments, where you're watching people 17, 18, 1900 strength play, they're probably more accurate to what their actual strength is. However, the official ratings of the players in this tournament are not going to be accurate to their real strength. Their chess.com rapid rating is. I'm going to list their official rating in this video and on the screen, but I'll also talk about their rapid strength as well. Either way, I should be heavily favored going into this game. With that being said, let's see what happens. So we start the game with a relatively normal opening. I generally play the Caro-Kann against e4, and we get e4, c6, knight to c3, d5, and d4. This is known as the classical Caro-Kann. One of the three, variations of the opening that has been played thousands upon thousands of times. Extremely dense theory to it. So you could learn the classical Caro-Kann for years, and that's probably how long it would take to get the fully grandmaster level understanding of the opening. However, the reason I play it is not because I know that much about the opening. Now, it shows itself pretty quickly in the game that one of the bigger advantages I have as a player going into this and in kind of showing a gap in skill level is my understanding of the opening, not the theory behind it necessarily, but the game plan behind the opening itself. The first couple of moves are relatively normal. In this opening, you always take the pawn, you can recapture with the knight, and there are three variations from here, and I play the classical main line, which is bishop to f5. This is what I normally play. And I've played this enough, and I understand the theory enough to know what the game plan is for both sides. What is that game plan, right? Well, generally speaking, White's going to play the move knight to g3 in response to bishop to f5. You will back up the bishop. Black will back up the bishop. White plays h4, threatening to trap the bishop. Black plays h6. And then a series of various moves take place, generally speaking. You might see h5, in which you just back up the bishop. Knight to f3, e6. Oftentimes this white light squared bishop will go to trade off black's bishop. You'll trade. Black plays knight f6. White develops this bishop somewhere. Let's just say to here. Black develops the bishop to e7. queenside castles, kingside castles. Not necessarily in that order, but generally speaking, that's what a lot of these positions are going to look like. And this is an extremely important lesson from this game that I think a lot of people can learn from. You don't have to know all of the deep theory and how to punish every single mistake out of the opening from your opponent in order to win games from opening knowledge. It's much less important to know specific theory than it is to understand the game plan in a position. And let me show you why. So I just showed you, relatively speaking, the main line of the classical Caro-Kann. More or less. But, okay, let's say you know all of this. You get to this position. Great. Now what? Well, now white and black have very, very simple plans. White played the moves h4 and h5 in order to gain space on the king side. It's the only way to gain an advantage in this position, actually. In the game plan, you move your knights, and you play g4, you play g5, and you make a kingside attack with your pawns, and you try to take black's soul away from them. You try to checkmate them and destroy them. Okay, what's black's game plan? Very similar. You see white and black castled on opposite sides. Black castled kingside and white castled queenside. This means that black's plan is very similar. Queenside pawn storm, a5, b5, a4, b4, and you try to take white's soul, destroy them, and checkmate them. That is much more important to know conceptually than the specific moves I just mentioned. If you miss these moves, although one of the other pros of this opening is that these are very natural moves, especially for black. If you don't know every single one of these moves in the right order, I don't know all the moves in the right order necessarily, but I know the understanding, I know the setup, and I know the game plan. And the difference between those two things shows itself in this game. So you don't need to know any of this. Part of the reason you don't need to know any of this is what happened in this game. So we get 4 moves of this. You've seen this. Well, the chess game has seen this position thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times. And after one move, because we're playing an intermediate level tournament, beginner, but intermediate level tournament, we are already immediately into the uncanny valley on move 5 with a move that, in the Lichess database at least, has literally never been seen before at the master level, and that move is queen to d3. It is not a good move. White gives away all advantage with this move, and black is slightly better if they know how to punish it in the right way. The issue is that I've never seen this move before, and nobody ever studies queen to d3 because it's not a good move. Much more common at this level, if you're going to see a move that's not the normal move, not the main line, knight to g3, much more common at this level is bishop to d3. And you might know the punish for this, potentially. You can potentially even take this pawn. Queen to d3 is just a really weird move. And it's not common at all, never seen it played before. And so I didn't know what the right move was in response to it. The computer says the correct move here is queen to d5. Just putting immense pressure on this knight, threatening to win it. And now black is very much, white's very much on the back foot. Black's the one with the initiative here, developing a piece with tempo, which is always good. I didn't play this in the right way. Instead, I played it. You don't have to know queen to d5 in this position in order to get an advantage of the opening through opening knowledge, because I didn't know it. Instead, I played moves that were very natural. In this position, yeah, I could stockpile pressure on this pinned piece. That might make a lot of sense. However, it's a lot more easy and simple to do what I did, which was take it. He retakes, of course, with the queen, and now he has a queen in the center of the board that is just a very easy target for my knight. Develop with tempo, and then just go about the same game plan. e6, bishop e7, castles, and then destroy him, right? Just go about the same game plan, except it's going to look a little bit different because this queen's not on a particularly normal square. It's going to have to move somewhere. He's moved his queen 3 times in the opening. That's not normal at all. are going to be fine. Okay, so we get relatively normal looking moves from here. White, it says white is slightly better, and this move is slightly inaccurate. But again, I think this idea is extremely natural for black, which is why I just went ahead and did it. Okay, so the queen backs up to d3 after being hit, and we get my game plan. e6, bishop to e3 for white, makes sense. Bishop to e7, queenside castles, kingside castles. Not just in the classical Caro-Kann, but in any situation in which white and black are castled on opposite sides, the game plan is going to be an opposite side pawn storm, basically all the time. It's probably more famously common in Sicilian structures, where white usually queenside castles and black either kingside castles or oftentimes goes uncastled entirely. But in the classical Caro-Kann, it's very similar. So we get to this position, knight to f3, and okay. We've made it out of the opening. Both sides are basically equal. And now what, right? We've gotten here, and it's, again, much more important to know what to do from this point due to the opening that you've played than it is to know the specific move or know what the theoretical best move is in a position that's never been reached before. So knowing what the game plan is in this position, knowing that in order to win this game, black's best way to move forward and try to prove an advantage is to try to make a queenside attack. I played the move here after 10 knight f3, a5. And the plan's very simple. b5, b4, a4, slam him. Take his soul. And white should respond with the move h4. If not now, very soon. We see first pawn to c3, which is fine. I believe the computer said this was like the second best move. It's a fine move. And I play b5. Again, very simple. I'm threatening to play the move b4. And the idea is, if he's, he has to, right now, he has to play h4 or g4. Probably h4 because g4 would hang. To this. He has to play h4 and he has to start a kingside attack now. Because if he doesn't, I'm just going to rip the entire position open with the move pawn to b4. He's not going to be able to stop it from happening, and I'm going to have very direct and open lines of attack to his king, whereas my king is going to be completely safe. And you can't let that happen. You have to play on the side that you're better, on the side that you have more space at, and the side that your pieces are pointed towards attacking. This position is like, it's either plus 0.2 or minus 0.2, or it's basically zeros. If white plays one of two moves, knight to e5 or h4. I didn't know all this in the game. I looked at the computer a little bit afterwards. And you basically have to start making forward progress with white if you want to stay in the game. It's zeros, it's technically completely equal, but somebody's going to lose, as is very often the case with opposite side castling situations. Instead, white played the move pawn to a3. And this move is a very understandable one to make. It is a move that theoretically solidifies, the goal of the move is to solidify the queenside, defend your king, and try to slow down black's queenside attack. The evaluation goes from 0 to almost minus 2 on one move. Why? This is way too slow. Way too slow. And it actually isn't helpful in the slightest. If anything, this weakens white's defense of their king. b3 becomes a potential square for me to infiltrate on with my queen, or potentially my knight at some point in time. Secondly, it doesn't really prevent b4 at all. Even if I wanted to play b4 right this second, I would lose a pawn, but in exchange for that one pawn, I have plenty of compensation in the form of very, very open lines of attack and a much, much safer king. There's more to evaluating a position than just material, and this is a great example of that. I don't play the move b4 immediately. I want to prepare it. I don't want to lose a pawn if I don't have to, and instead, I position my pieces into better squares. I play the move knight b to d7. This has a couple of purposes. The first is the fact that it connects my rooks as soon as my queen moves. The second is it opens up the square b8 for one of my two rooks to come to. This is important because in a lot of positions where one side queen side castles, a very common move is the move king to b1. It doesn't get played here, but in general, king b1 is very common because it controls the a2 square for the king. The king gets a little bit closer out of the center, a little bit farther away from the center, and the c pawn oftentimes likes the move, as it has in this position. And so, if you want to play the moves like c3 or c4, or trade the c pawn off, you don't want your king on the c file. So a very common prophylactic move is the move king to b1. Anticipating that, having the b8 square open for one of my rooks to come to can be very valuable. It's a little bit of a slow move. It's arguably unnecessary. And a move like c5 to prepare knight c6, even though it would theoretically lose a pawn, is also extremely possible in a position like this. But I think knight b to d7 makes a lot of sense as a move. White does not play the move king to b1 in this position, and instead White plays another mistake, another bad move, and that move is bishop to d2. Bishop to d2, again, is just moving in the wrong direction. The idea makes sense. You're trying to prevent b4 with, at all, if at all costs. I guess in this position, I could have theoretically played b4 anyway, right? Takes. Excuse me, I didn't actually lose material if I played b4. However, in a situation where we trade off all those pawns, I would like to have my rooks connected and able to control squares like b8 and c8 together. So I played knight to b to d7 anyway. He played bishop to d2 to prevent the move b4, which was his idea behind a3 as well. So all of his moves have a game plan to them. It's just the wrong game plan, and that's the problem with them. They're logical moves that make a lot of sense and have a point to them. It's just not the right game plan for the position and for the opening. This is why opening knowledge is so important. Bishop to d2 theoretically protects this diagonal. However, this is another bishop move in this position where he could have played bishop to d2 immediately. It's slow, it's moving backwards, and again, this kingside attack just hasn't happened yet, and it has to happen for white to have any chances of winning. I play the move queen to b6. This does a few things. Connects my rooks officially, although my queen being there isn't too bad, right? But it officially connects my rooks, and it also basically says, look, I'm going to play b4, and you can't stop me. There's no real way, no concrete way to prevent the move pawn to b4 from being played. If I play b4 and trade off all these pawns, the game's basically over. Because there's just no defense of the king. The king's completely naked without his queenside pawns here. And he's just going to get slaughtered. If I play b4 successfully and rip open the game's basically over. He plays the move pawn to h3. Again, it's just too slow. He sees the threat of this fork coming, but this isn't the side of the board that I'm playing on. It's much more likely for me to play a move like knight to d5 to try to jump in to a potential square in the queen's side and have another attacker on the board. I had not considered the move knight to g4 in this position in the slightest, at any point in time. Again, that's not to say it's a horrible move that's bad or anything. I'm not trying to rack on my opponent too much. That's not the point behind this. Again, these moves are logical. They have a point behind them. They make sense. It's just not the right game plan in the position. h4 is much more thematic and much more useful in a situation like this. h3 is just too slow. I can ignore that and promptly play the move pawn to b4. White's best try here is probably to attempt to close the position up as much as he can. You're not going to be able to stop at least one of these files from opening, but you can't have them all be open. That's not good. Probably a4 if I had to guess. Takes bishop to c3, and then you don't have a fully open file, and you can try to struggle on from there, but it's already very, very bleak. And it becomes a much more swift outcome after the move c takes b4, a takes b4, a takes b4, bishop takes b4. Now I have a fully open a file and a half open b file to work with, and this king just does not really have a way of escape, especially with this bishop on this square. You can try to trade the bishop off. That could do something. But again, it's just going to be very difficult. I'm threatening just so much infiltration on the queen side, completely ripping apart this side of the board, opening it up for an attack, and this is how you try to win the game in this sort of position. White makes the move bishop to g5 in this position, which is, again, not a good move. This is actually playing on a different concept. Aside from all of these game plans I'm talking about in opposite side castling situations, this prepares a bad trade. You've made two bishop moves already in this game, and you've invested a lot of tempo. You, as in white, excuse me, white has invested a lot of tempo into this bishop. It would be one thing to trade this bishop off for the very active dark squared bishop of black, and a piece that is playing a pretty key role in the attack, and that is cutting off the d2 square from the enemy king's escape route. Instead, by playing the move bishop to d5, you're preparing to trade this bishop off for this knight. I know technically this knight, but this knight's going to recapture and just replace the knight on f6 if the bishop were to ever capture that knight. So you're effectively trading off a bishop that you have now moved 3 times, 1, 2, 3 times, for a knight that has moved once and is not doing anything in the game. This pawn is extremely successful and effective at blocking off this knight. It's one of the only bad pieces I have in the position. You're trading it off for white's, maybe not white's best piece, but one of white's best pieces. And again, it spends a lot of time that I'm spending ripping open the position. It looks like there's the possibility of a removing defender tactic in this position with a move like bishop takes f6, which is what happens in the game. However, we'll see in the game that it doesn't really work. You can't take here either to try to like deflect the knight and then trade and open my position. Like one idea would be in this position. One reason that c5 might optically to a beginner not look like a great move is that you could take, and if knight takes, this opens up the position and opens up a potential attack for white. The reason this doesn't work is relatively clear, and that's the fact that I can actually just take back with the queen. If I took back with the bishop, I would not hang the knight, excuse me, because you could take back with either, excuse me. Take back with the queen with jack, or you could take back with the bishop. And either way, if bishop takes f6 now, the knight just recaptures and gets out of the way of the queen. And the queen can't take first, even though you would be getting 2 pieces. You're trading 2 pieces for the queen. This isn't good. So any move order, there actually is nothing here for white. And so the move pawn to c5 actually is successful. We get bishop takes f6 in the game, knight takes f6, pawn takes, and queen takes. I guess a potentially more savage move here is rook to c8, but it's unnecessary. Queen takes c5, and now we have 2 completely open files facing the white king, and now because this bishop got traded off, this bishop has survived the mid game, and now as we're reaching towards the climax of this game, the end of the game, it's providing a very, very important role in this attack, and that is cutting off the king from potentially scurrying and saving itself on the other side of the board. Now, if king to d2 were possible in this position, I would still have the move queen takes f2 check, meaning it would be rough anyway, even if that were possible here. But it's not possible, and that makes the game end a lot more quickly. King to b1, and the potential of this b8 square is actually never going to be realized, meaning knight to d7 was never technically necessary, but that's only because we have 2 different open files to belligerently attack the king on instead. Queen to a5 threatens the move queen to a2, which basically simply cannot be allowed. So king to c2, making queen to a2 useless. And we get a kind of funny ending to this game. I played the move rook to a to c8 on move 21, which is not good. It's not like horrible or anything. The problem is that after king b1, black doesn't have anything better than moving back with the rook on a8. I played rook c8 and realized, wait a second, this doesn't do anything. Like there's no simple way forward actually with this move. So he goes back. I simply go back on a8, and he goes back. Obviously, I don't repeat moves. That would be lunacy. Instead, I simply bring the other rook. And now the game is over. White has two legal squares to move his king, and at either of them, queen to a2 or queen to a4 is checkmate. The only way to get out of the position without getting checkmated is to sacrifice the queen on c4. And at this point, White's up with queen for a rook. You know, like you continue like rook c8, this. You're up a queen for a rook. At most levels, this is going to be game over anyway. And even if that weren't the case, White's king is on d3 and has nothing around it to keep it safe. And Black's king is completely safe on g7. This bishop's blunted. The game would be over anyway, even if you did play that. But that's the only way to evade checkmate. Instead, White plays the move, king to b3. And there's simply mate 1 here, queen to a4 checkmate. We get it on the board. And that is game over. It would have been a decisive material advantage. Instead, we get checkmate on the board, and I win round 1 of the Sunday Marshall Chess Club Beginner Rapid Tournament. Okay, so thoughts on the game and lessons to be learned. There are two main lessons, two main themes. The first is the thematic thought process that won me the game. Even though I didn't know the theoretical best continuation given the moves that White played or anything like that, that didn't matter. I knew simple, improving moves to naturally develop my pieces and progress towards a simple game plan that proved decisive. White didn't know the same game plan for themselves, and that was the difference in the game. It's relatively simple. Also, the idea of trading pieces is relatively. I'll quickly go back to that position in the game. The idea of trading pieces here, and good trades versus bad trades, and good pieces versus bad pieces, is also a potentially useful concept to remember and to learn from this game. And how it can be applied in lower level games that you know, things that might be more realistic for you to remember and for you to see in your own games. So, good game to my opponent. We'll talk about him a little bit more at the conclusion of this tournament. But good game to him. I know this was a win. Still a good bit to learn from, both from how I played and also my opponent, how some of the moves that my opponent made. I know during this game it probably looked relatively, I don't want to say arrogant, but I wasn't very critical of my moves. Which I do kind of want to address now before we move forward in the tournament. That's not going to be particularly common. This is pretty easily the best game I played in the tournament from an accuracy standpoint. According to computer analysis, I played, I believe, over 90% accuracy. Didn't make any mistakes, yada, 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 yada. Didn't make, I played a very good game for my level. And so there weren't a whole lot of moves that I made that I went, no, actually I should have played this instead. Even the moves that weren't particularly accurate, I think were understandable given the situation. That's not going to be common. In these other games, there's going to be a lot more criticizing of my moves, and I just generally didn't play nearly as accurately in the rest of the tournament. So, until then, I will see you next time. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you soon.